The chamber was cold. It always felt cold to Claire Bennett, even though the temperature controls maintained perfect conditions for all species present. She sat in the lowest tier of seats, where Earth's representative had sat for 200 years. The seat was made of some material that adjusted to her body but never quite felt comfortable. Perhaps that was intentional. Above her, the 12 senior members of the Galactic Council occupied their elevated platforms. Chancellor Thrain sat highest of all, his serpentine body coiled around a floating throne. His scales caught the light from the dying red giant outside, making him look like he was made of copper and blood. He was ancient, older than human civilization, and he never let anyone forget it. Claire had been Earth's ambassador for 15 years. 15 years of being ignored, dismissed, and patronized. 15 years of watching human innovation stolen without credit. 15 years of proposals rejected without explanation. She was 53 years old but felt 70. The stress had turned her hair silver and carved lines into her face that makeup could not hide. Today was different. Today she had evidence that even the council could not ignore. The data pad in her hands felt heavy, weighted with the deaths of 372 people. She could recite their names from memory now. She had read every file, looked at every picture. Families, children, engineers and miners who had believed the council would protect them. The Vrexian attack had happened 3 days ago. Human ships had been working in the asteroid belt, the belt that Earth had discovered and properly claimed through every official channel. The paperwork was perfect. Claire had made sure of it herself. But the Vrexian consortium wanted those asteroids, and what the consortium wanted, they usually got. Their warships had appeared without warning. No hails, no negotiations, just weapons fire. 2 civilian transports were destroyed instantly. A third was crippled, venting atmosphere and spinning out of control. Captain Daniel Hughes and his crew aboard the Valiant had managed to save some of the survivors, but only after watching helplessly as hundreds died. Claire had watched the footage a dozen times. She could close her eyes and still see it. The flash of weapons fire, the transports breaking apart, the tiny figures in spacesuits tumbling away from the wreckage. Some of them had still been alive when the recording ended. Some of them had been children. Chancellor Thrain called the session to order with a sound like grinding metal. The conversation around the chamber died away. Claire stood, her legs steady despite the anger burning in her chest. She had learned to control her emotions in this place. Showing weakness invited attack. She began her presentation, her voice clear and professional. She showed the claim documents properly filed 3 years ago. She showed the survey data proving the asteroids were in unclaimed space when Earth found them. She showed the 17 previous attempts to get the claim process through the proper subcommittee. 17 attempts, all ignored. Then she showed the footage. The council chamber fell silent as the screens displayed the attack. The weapons fire looked like bright streaks against the black of space. The explosions were brief, almost pretty, until you remembered that each flash of light was a ship full of people dying. Claire let the footage play to the end. When it finished, she looked up at Chancellor Thrain. Her voice was steady. She demanded justice. She demanded compensation for the families of the dead. She demanded that the Vrexian consortium be sanctioned for their unprovoked attack on civilians. She demanded that Earth's claim to the asteroid belt be recognized. Chancellor Thrain listened with what might have been amusement in his eyes. When Claire finished, he was silent for a long moment. Then he spoke, his voice carrying easily through the vast chamber. The ruling was simple. Earth had failed to file their claim through the correct procedures. The fact that those procedures were deliberately designed to be impossible for junior species was not mentioned. The claim was invalid. Furthermore, since Earth had no valid claim, the Vrexian consortium had every right to clear the area of unauthorized vessels. The destruction of human ships was regrettable but legal. No sanctions would be applied. No compensation would be paid. The asteroid belt was awarded to the Vrexian consortium with full mineral rights. Ambassador Krath of the Vrexian consortium sat in his elevated seat and did not bother to hide his satisfaction. His mandibles clicked together, and what Claire had learned was their version of a smile. He had won, as he always won, because the council always sided with power over justice. Claire tried to respond. She pointed out the procedural irregularities. She noted that the same subcommittee that had ignored their claim had processed Vrexian claims in days. She reminded the council that attacking civilian vessels was a war crime under their own laws. Chancellor Thrain cut her off with a sharp gesture. The ruling was final. If she continued to disrupt the session, Earth would be expelled from the chamber. Claire looked around the chamber. The senior members watched with expressions ranging from boredom to contempt. The other junior species representatives sat silent in their low seats. A few looked sympathetic, but none spoke up. They all knew what happened to species that challenged the council. They had families to protect, interests to defend. Silence was safer. Something broke inside Claire in that moment. Not dramatically, not with anger or tears. Just a quiet snap like a thread pulled too tight. She had spent 15 years trying to work within this system. 15 years believing that patience and persistence would eventually lead to fairness. 15 years wrong. She gathered her documents carefully, taking her time. Her hands did not shake. She placed the datapad in her case and closed it with a soft click that seemed loud in the quiet chamber. Then she stood and straightened her jacket. She looked up at Chancellor Thrain one last time. Her words were simple and clear. Earth was withdrawing from the Galactic Council, effective immediately. Humanity would no longer participate in this institution. They would no longer send representatives, pay dues, or honor council authority. They were done. The reaction was immediate. Voices erupted around the chamber, some shocked, some angry, some confused. Chancellor Thrain let them talk for a moment, then raised a hand for silence. When he spoke, his voice dripped with amusement. He told Claire that humanity could not survive without the council. They were too young, too primitive, too dependent on the infrastructure and protection the council provided. They would be back within a year, begging for readmission. Claire did not argue. She did not threaten. She did not even respond. She simply nodded once to the few junior species representatives who dared meet her eyes. Then she turned and walked toward the massive doors at the far end of the chamber. Her footsteps echoed in the sudden silence. Every eye in the chamber was on her back. The doors opened automatically as she approached. She walked through them without looking back. Behind her, she heard the doors close with a sound like finality. She kept walking down the long corridor, past the empty embassy offices that would soon be abandoned, past the memorial wall where the names of honored diplomats were carved in stone. Her name would never be on that wall. She did not care. By the time Claire reached her shuttle, Earth's seat in the council chamber was already dissolving. The smart matter that formed it was reabsorbing itself, erasing 2 centuries of human presence. Within hours, every human embassy across council space began shutting down. Staff packed their belongings and boarded ships bound for home. They did not say goodbye. Within days, human merchant vessels began leaving council ports. They finished their current contracts, paid their docking fees, and departed. They did not file new flight plans. They did not request new trade permits. They simply left one by one, until the space lanes that had always carried human ships stood empty. Within weeks, the communication networks that connected Earth to the galaxy went dark. The frequencies that had carried human voices for 200 years broadcast only silence. Ships that tried to hail human vessels received no response. Messages sent to Earth went unanswered. It was as if humanity had simply decided that the rest of the galaxy no longer existed. Claire watched it all, from her apartment on Earth. She had resigned as ambassador the day after walking out of the council chamber. Someone else could handle the logistics of withdrawal. She was done with diplomacy, done with politics, done with trying to reason with beings who had no interest in reason. She had tried her best, and it had not been enough. Now others could try different approaches. She thought about the 372 people who had died in the asteroid belt. She thought about their families who would never get justice from the council. She thought about all the other injustices she had witnessed over 15 years, all the times humanity had been cheated and mocked and dismissed. And she thought about Chancellor Thrain's certainty that humans would come crawling back within a year. For the first time in months, Claire smiled. It was not a happy smile, but it was genuine. The council was about to learn something important about humanity. They were about to learn what happened when you pushed people too far, ignored them too long, took them for granted too completely. They were about to discover that silence could be more powerful than any threat. And they were about to find out exactly how much they had depended on the species they had treated with such. The first month after humanity's withdrawal, the council celebrated. Chancellor Thrain gave speeches about maintaining standards and refusing to be bullied by lesser species. The major powers held conferences about dividing up the territories and contracts that humans had managed. The Vrexian Consortium was particularly eager to claim human trade routes. They had wanted those routes for decades. Ambassador Krath personally oversaw the takeover of human shipping contracts. The numbers looked good on paper. 47 major routes, hundreds of smaller ones, connections to nearly every inhabited system. The consortium's economists predicted massive profits. They started hiring crews and requisitioning vessels. Within 6 weeks, Vrexian ships were flying routes that human freighters had managed for generations. The problem started small. A Vrexian freighter arrived at a colony world 3 days late because their navigator had miscalculated the jump. The colony had been expecting medical supplies that were now delayed. People did not die, but there were complications. A human ship would have arrived on time. Human ships always arrived on time. Then a shipment of food to a mining station was contaminated because the Vrexian crew did not properly seal the cargo bay. The humans had detailed procedures for handling sensitive cargo. The Vrexians had not bothered to read those procedures. 50 miners got sick, 2 died. The consortium paid a fine and moved on. It was cheaper than implementing proper safety protocols. More incidents followed. Delayed shipments, damaged goods, lost cargo, missing documentation. The Vrexians were not incompetent, but they approached shipping as a business to be exploited rather than a service to be provided. Human freighters had charged fair prices and maintained high standards because they believed reliable shipping was important for everyone. The consortium charged what the market would bear and cut corners wherever possible. 3 months after taking over human routes, the consortium's profit margins were lower than projected. They raised prices to compensate. Colonies complained but had no alternatives. Some tried to negotiate with other species for shipping services. Those species charged even more than the Vrexians. The galactic shipping industry had become a seller's market, and prices reflected it. Meanwhile, other changes rippled through council space. The Azurian Collective had claimed several human research stations, excited about the advanced equipment left behind. Their scientists tried to operate the machinery. Nothing worked. Every system was locked behind quantum encryption that resisted all attempts to break it. The equipment was worth billions, but without the access codes, it was just expensive junk. The Azurians contacted Earth asking for the codes. Their messages went unanswered. They tried offering money. Silence. They tried threatening legal action. More silence. Eventually, they gave up and scrapped the stations for raw materials. It was a massive loss, but at least they recovered something. Dr. Lisa Morgan's departure caused problems across 17 different sectors. She had been the leading expert on exotic matter stabilization, consulting for governments and corporations throughout council space. Her knowledge had kept dozens of critical systems functioning. Without her, those systems began to fail. A power plant on Karathi Prime went offline when its containment field destabilized. Dr. Morgan had been scheduled to perform routine maintenance the week after humanity withdrew. The Karathi engineers tried to handle it themselves using her published papers. They made the problem worse. The plant was offline for 8 months while they rebuilt the entire containment system from scratch. It cost them billions and left half the planet on emergency power. Entertainment exports vanished completely. Human music, literature, games, and art had been popular across the galaxy. Not just popular, but culturally significant. Zoltharian youth had adopted human jazz as their own. Menthari scholars studied human poetry. Velaran families watched human films together. All of that stopped when Earth went silent. The Zoltharian government dismissed the cultural impact at first. Entertainment was not essential. They had their own music and art. But young Zoltharians did not see it that way. They organized protests demanding access to human culture. The protests turned into riots when the government tried to shut them down. 17 people died before order was restored, over entertainment. The government was humiliated. 6 months after humanity's withdrawal, a junior diplomat named Kira started compiling a report. She was Zoltharian, young and idealistic, and she had opposed the Council's treatment of Earth. Her government had not listened to her then. Now she wanted to understand exactly what had been lost when the humans left. Her research revealed a disturbing pattern. Humans had not just participated in galactic society. They had maintained it. They ran asteroid tracking systems that prevented collisions with inhabited worlds. They maintained subspace relay stations that everyone used but no one else wanted to fund. They provided disaster relief wherever emergencies occurred, asking nothing in return. They mediated disputes between species, preventing small conflicts from becoming wars. The list kept growing. Educational programs for developing species, medical research shared freely, infrastructure maintenance that everyone took for granted, cultural exchanges that built understanding between different peoples, humanitarian aid that saved lives and asked for nothing back, all of it done quietly without fanfare, because humans believed it was the right thing to do. And all of it, gone. Kira's report ran to 400 pages. She sent it to her government with a simple conclusion written in bold text at the end. The Council had not just lost a member species, they had lost the foundation that held galactic civilization together. Everything else was built on work that humans had done for free. The real crisis began 8 months after humanity's withdrawal. Dr. Gregory Palmer had been monitoring a strain of Kandarian fever, a disease that affected 14 different species. He had developed vaccines and treatment protocols that kept the disease contained. Before Earth's communication networks shut down, he sent one final message to his colleagues. The fever was mutating. Without continued monitoring and updated vaccines, an outbreak was inevitable. His warning was received and filed. The Council's medical division noted it but took no action. Dr. Palmer was gone. Someone else would have to handle it. They assigned a research team to develop new vaccines using his published work. The team was competent but not brilliant. They needed 6 months to complete work that Palmer could have done in 6 weeks. The outbreak started on a mining colony in the Karathi system. One person got sick, then 5, then 50. The colony tried to quarantine the infected, but Kandarian fever was highly contagious. Within a week, half the colony was ill. Within 2 weeks, the disease had spread to a nearby space station. Traders carried it to other systems. The infection rate was exponential. The Council's medical facilities were overwhelmed within a month. 17 worlds reported outbreaks. Hospitals ran out of beds. Medical supplies ran short. The vaccines the research team had developed were only 40% effective against the mutated strain. Millions fell ill. Thousands started dying. Chancellor Thrain called an emergency session. The chamber was tense. The senior members were visibly worried for the first time since humanity had left. This was not an inconvenience or an economic problem. People were dying in large numbers. The crisis was spreading. They needed help. The solution was obvious. Contact Earth. Dr. Palmer had the expertise they needed. Human medical technology was more advanced than anyone had realized. If they asked for help, surely humanity would respond. Even angry children helped their parents when lives were at stake. The Council drafted a formal request and transmitted it to Earth on every available frequency. Silence. Days passed with no response. They sent more messages, increasingly urgent. Silence. They sent ships to the Sol system, carrying diplomatic credentials and requests for assistance. The ships were turned away by automated defense platforms. The platforms did not explain or negotiate. They simply denied entry and made it clear that attempts to force passage would be met with overwhelming force. The ships returned with recordings of what they had seen. Human defense platforms that had been undetectable until they activated. Weapons technology that exceeded anything in Council space. Ship designs that suggested decades of development beyond what humanity had shown. The pilots were shaken. They had gone expecting to find a struggling species eager for reconciliation. They had found a fortress that did not need them at all. Ambassador Krath suggested offering payment for the vaccines. The Council authorized a substantial sum. The message was transmitted. Silence. They doubled the offer. Silence. They offered triple. Silence. Money, apparently, was not interesting to humans anymore. The pandemic continued to spread. The death toll climbed into the hundreds of thousands. Medical personnel worked around the clock trying to contain the outbreak. Nothing worked. The vaccine they had was not good enough. The quarantine procedures were failing. They needed human help and humans were not answering. Kira watched the crisis unfold from her position in the Zaltharian diplomatic corps. She had tried to warn people. Her report had documented exactly this scenario. Humans had been managing critical sys. 15 months after humanity walked away, The gateway network began to fail. The network was a system of subspace corridors that connected distant parts of the galaxy. It made fast travel possible, turning journeys that would take years into trips of days or weeks. The network had been built centuries ago by the Council's greatest engineers. Humanity had not built it, but they had maintained it. Jacob Price had been the chief maintenance engineer for the gateway network. He was a quiet man who visited each node quarterly, checking stability algorithms and making tiny adjustments. The adjustments seemed minor, barely noticeable in the short term, but over time small errors in the algorithms would compound. Without regular corrections, the network would destabilize. Jacob had left with the rest of humanity. The Council assigned their own engineers to take over his work. They were competent professionals who understood the basic principles. They ran diagnostics and found no immediate problems. The system appeared stable. They filed reports saying everything was fine. They were wrong. The first gateway node collapsed on a Tuesday morning, Galactic Standard Time. The node connected 3 major trade routes. When it failed, 200 ships were stranded between systems. Some had enough fuel to limp to the nearest port. Others had to be towed. 3 ships ran out of life support before rescue arrived. 47 people died. Council engineers rushed to analyze the failure. The node had simply stopped functioning. The subspace corridor it maintained had collapsed. Ships could no longer use that route. Repairs would take months and cost billions. While they worked on understanding what had happened, 2 more nodes failed. Then 5 more. Then a dozen. The cascading failures cut Council space into isolated sectors. Travel between core worlds that used to take days now took weeks or months. Commerce ground to a halt. Fleets were stranded far from home. Communication delays meant governments could not coordinate responses. The economic impact was measured in trillions. The social impact was incalculable. Council engineers tried to repair the damaged nodes. They discovered that Jacob's quarterly adjustments had not been minor maintenance. They had been preventing catastrophic failure. The gateway system was built on mathematics so complex that tiny errors would propagate through the entire network. Jacob had been finding and correcting those errors before they became critical. Without him, the errors had accumulated past the point of easy repair. Fixing one node took 6 months and required completely rebuilding the control systems. There were hundreds of nodes. At that rate, repairs would take decades. Meanwhile, more nodes failed every week. The gateway network, pride of the Council, was dying, and there was nothing they could do to stop it. The Vrexian Consortium faced its own crisis. Their mining operations in the disputed asteroid belt had yielded nothing but disasters. The asteroids that humanity had been targeting contained rare elements, but those elements were chemically unstable. They required specialized handling techniques to extract safely, techniques that humans had developed but never shared. The first mining facility exploded when workers tried to extract ore using standard methods. The explosion was visible from 3 systems away. 80 workers died instantly. Another 100 died later from radiation exposure. The consortium tried to learn from the mistake. Their next facility used more safety precautions. It also exploded, killing 60 more people. After the third facility exploded, killing another 70 workers, the consortium finally abandoned the belt. They had spent billions developing the sites. They had killed over 200 of their own people. They had gained nothing. The asteroids sat empty, full of valuable resources that no one except humans knew how to extract safely. Ambassador Krath, who had smirked when humanity left, was recalled in disgrace. He had promised the consortium that taking over human assets would be profitable. Instead, it had been catastrophic. His career was over. His family was shamed. He spent his remaining years in isolation, a warning to others about the cost of underestimating humans. His replacement was a younger Vrexian named Thex. Thex had opposed the attack on human ships. He had argued for negotiation. The consortium elders had ignored him then. Now they gave him Krath's position and told him to fix the disaster. Thex's first act was to propose reaching out to Earth. The proposal went to the Council for approval. Chancellor Thrain blocked it immediately. Asking humans for help would show weakness. The Council had to solve its own problems. They were the ancient powers, the enlightened species, the guardians of galactic civilization. They did not need assistance from children who had been in space for barely 2 centuries. But the problems kept multiplying faster than solutions could be found. The Kandarian fever pandemic continued to spread. The gateway network kept failing. Supply chains collapsed. Prices spiked. Unemployment rose as businesses failed. Civil unrest erupted on dozens of worlds. Member species started questioning whether the Council could actually govern anymore. The Zaltharian Collective threatened to withdraw from the Council if immediate aid was not provided for the pandemic. The Karathi Union demanded compensation for the gateway failures that had destroyed their merchant fleet. The Menthari tribes refused to pay their council dues until services were restored. Junior species began holding secret meetings, discussing whether staying in the council was worth the cost. The Azurian Collective decided they had found a solution. With humanity gone, former human territory was essentially unclaimed. The Azurians were known for aggressive expansion. They had been eyeing human space for years. Now nothing stood in their way. They assembled a colonization fleet and sent it toward Proxima Station, a human outpost that appeared abandoned. Admiral Vrax commanded the fleet. He was confident and ambitious, eager to claim glory for the collective. As his ships approached Proxima Station, he broadcast standard territorial claims. The station did not respond. Sensors showed no active defenses. Encouraged, Admiral Vrax ordered his fleet forward across the boundary that humanity had marked as their territory. What happened next took exactly 40 seconds. Defense platforms that had been completely invisible suddenly appeared on every sensor. They did not fire weapons. They did not need to. Precise gravitational pulses washed over the Azurian fleet. Every ship went dead simultaneously. Engines offline. Weapons offline. Life support at minimum. The ships were intact but completely helpless. Then human vessels appeared. Hundreds of them, materializing from stealth positions that no Azurian sensors had detected. They were not warships in the traditional sense. They were smaller, faster, more advanced than anything the Council had ever seen. They moved with perfect coordination, towing the disabled Azurian ships back across the boundary like tugboats moving cargo. The human ships released the Azurian fleet just beyond the human border. Then they transmitted a single message on all frequencies, 3 words in clear galactic standard. Do not return. No threats. No explanations. No negotiations. Just those 3 words. Then the human ships vanished back into stealth and the defense platforms became invisible again. Admiral Vrax sat in his disabled command chair, staring at his screens in shock. His fleet had been neutralized in less than a minute. The technology required to do that exceeded anything the Council possessed. The humans had disabled an entire fleet without firing a shot, without causing a single casualty with perfect precision. It was a demonstration of capability that changed everything. The recordings from the incident spread through Council space within days. Military analysts studied them obsessively. The conclusions were disturbing. Human stealth technology was decades beyond Council capabilities. Their gravitational weapons were completely unknown. Their coordination suggested a level of artificial intelligence that was theoretically impossible. Their defensive perimeter around the Sol system was impenetrable. More importantly, the technology shown was clearly defensive in nature. The humans had not attacked. They had not invaded. They had simply protected their territory with overwhelming force and then withdrawn. The message was clear. Humanity could defend itself against anything the Council might send. But they had no interest in fighting unless provoked. Kira wrote another report analyzing the Azurian incident. Her conclusion was stark. Humanity had been holding back during their entire time in the Council. The primitive technology they had displayed was decades out of date. The military weakness they had shown was completely false. They had been pretending to be less advanced while actually leaping ahead of everyone else. Every time the Council had stolen human technology, humanity had already moved on to something better. Every time the Council had mocked human capabilities, humans had been secretly developing systems that made Council technology look primitive. They had been patient, careful, and strategic, and now they were gone, taking all that advanced technology with them. Junior species representatives began private conversations. The picture that emerged was troubling. Humanity had not been the weak, primitive species the Council had treated them as. They had been quietly competent, maintaining systems that everyone else took for granted. They had contributed far more than they took. They had asked for very little and received even less, And when pushed too far, they had not fought. They had simply left. They had closed there. 26 months after humanity's withdrawal, Chancellor Thrain called an emergency session of the Galactic Council. The chamber that had once been filled to capacity now sat half empty. Representatives from 17 species were absent, dealing with crises at home. The remaining delegates looked tired and worried. The confidence that had filled this room 2 years ago was completely gone. Ambassador Thex rose to speak. His carapace, once gleaming and proud, was now dull with stress. He had aged visibly in the 2 years since replacing Krath. The burden of the consortium's failures weighed heavily on him. He activated his presentation, and grim statistics filled the chamber's screens. The Kandarian fever pandemic had killed 4 million people and infected 20 million more. The Gateway network was operating at 30% capacity. Trade volumes were down 60%. 17 sectors faced food shortages. Unemployment across council space exceeded 20%. Civil unrest had erupted on 43 worlds. The council, for the first time in its long history, was failing. Thex presented each statistic calmly without emotion. The numbers spoke for themselves. When he finished with the data, he paused and looked around the chamber. Then he said what everyone was thinking, but few dared speak aloud. The council needed to formally apologize to humanity and request their return. There was no other solution. Chancellor Thrain's reaction was immediate. His body coiled tighter around his throne, scales rippling with anger. Apologize to humans? Request their help? Show such weakness? It was unthinkable. The council did not apologize to lesser species. The council did not ask for help. The council led. That was the natural order. But when Thex called for a vote, even Thrain could not stop it. Species that had never challenged council leadership now voted openly for reconciliation. The motion passed with overwhelming support. Only 3 delegates opposed it. The council would send a formal delegation to Earth. They would apologize for past injustices. They would offer full membership with voting rights. They would pay compensation. They would do whatever was necessary to bring humanity back. The delegation was carefully chosen. 7 representatives from 7 species selected to show unity and good faith. Thex led the group representing the major powers. Kira represented the junior species. The others were diplomats known for skill and integrity. They boarded the Eternal Dawn, the Council's most prestigious vessel, and departed for the Sol system. The journey took 3 weeks using the few remaining gateway nodes. When they reached the boundary of human space, they transmitted formal requests for an audience. They cited emergency protocols. They invoked diplomatic immunity. They emphasized that they carried messages from the full council. Then they waited for a response. The response came from an automated defense platform. The voice was mechanical and completely impersonal. It asked them to state their purpose. Ambassador Thex explained they carried formal communications from the Galactic Council to the government of Earth. Another pause. Then new instructions. Proceed to Luna Station. Follow the transmitted coordinates exactly. Any deviation would be considered hostile action. As the Eternal Dawn traveled through the Sol system, the delegation saw evidence of massive development. Mars was fully terraformed, with cities visible from orbit and an atmosphere thick enough to support life. The asteroid belt was organized into industrial zones with structures larger than some stations in Council space. Jupiter's moons were ringed with orbital habitats. Venus was enclosed in mirrors undergoing climate modification. In 30 months, humanity had transformed their home system beyond recognition. The development suggested technology and resources far beyond what the Council had known humans possessed. It also suggested a population boom and economic expansion that should have been impossible in such a short time. Kira watched through the viewports and felt her last hopes die. Humans did not need the Council. They had never needed the Council. Luna Station was not the modest facility the delegation remembered. It was a massive complex that could house millions, with docking bays for hundreds of ships and defensive systems that would make any military planner envious. They were escorted to a conference room with a view of Earth. The planet looked beautiful and peaceful, and utterly indifferent to their presence. The human delegation arrived exactly on time. Their leader was Secretary Helen Grant, who had been Claire Bennett's assistant during the ambassador's final years. Grant was younger than Bennett, perhaps 40, with sharp eyes and an expression of polite disinterest. She sat down without greeting them. No pleasantries were exchanged. She simply asked what the council wanted. Ambassador Thex had prepared a long speech. He had planned to acknowledge the injustices humanity suffered. He had intended to explain how much the galaxy needed them. He had meant to appeal to their better nature, to remind them of shared history and common goals. But looking at Secretary Grant's expression, he realized speeches would be wasted. He kept his presentation brief. The council formally apologized for the Rexian attack and the unjust ruling that followed. They acknowledged 2 centuries of stolen technology and ignored contributions. They admitted that humanity had been treated unfairly. They requested humanity's return to the council with full voting rights. They offered trade concessions worth trillions. They promised compensation for every documented wrong. The offer was generous. More than generous. It reflected desperation rather than goodwill, and everyone in the room knew it. But it was genuine. The council needed help, and they were willing to pay whatever price humanity demanded. Thex finished his presentation and waited for a response. Secretary Grant listened without interrupting. She glanced at the datapad before her, then looked up with an expression of mild curiosity. Her question was simple. Why would we return? The words hung in the air like a physical weight. Thex had prepared answers for many questions, but not that one. He started explaining the mutual benefits. Grant's expression did not change. You misunderstand our position, Grant said quietly. We do not need the council. We never did. What we needed was fairness, respect, and basic decency. You provided none of those things, so we left. She gestured toward Earth through the viewport. In 30 months, we have accomplished more than we did in 2 centuries of council membership. Our economy is thriving. Our people are prosperous. We face no crises except those we choose to address. The galaxy is dying, Thex said urgently. Millions are suffering. You have the knowledge and resources to help. Grant nodded slowly. Yes, we do. But why should we? When we asked for help, we were denied. When we sought justice, we were mocked. When we contributed to the greater good, our contributions were stolen. You taught us that the galaxy operates on power and self-interest. We learned that lesson well. Kira could not stay silent any longer. Please, she said. Her voice cracked slightly. Our people are dying from Kandarian fever. Your vaccines could save millions. We were not responsible for the injustices you suffered. Grant turned to her and her expression softened slightly. No, you were not. You sat silent when injustice was done because speaking up would have cost you. That was your choice. These are the consequences. The words hit Kira like a physical blow. She had opposed the council's treatment of humanity. She had filed reports. She had argued in private. But Grant was right. When it mattered, when Claire Bennett had stood alone in the council chamber, Kira had remained silent. It had seemed like the smart choice then. Now she understood the cost of that silence. However, Grant continued, we are not monsters. We will provide humanitarian aid, but not through the council. Individual species may negotiate directly with Earth for assistance. We will evaluate each request on its merits. Species that supported justice and fairness will find us receptive. Species that participated in our exploitation will find us less so. As for rejoining the council, she said, standing to signal the meeting's end, Earth has no interest in participating in an institution that has demonstrated such profound moral bankruptcy. We wish you luck in solving the problems you created. This meeting is concluded. The words were final. There would be no negotiation, no compromise, no reconciliation. Humanity had moved on. The delegation was escorted back to their ship in silence. Human guards were polite but distant. No one offered refreshments or small talk. The humans treated them like unwelcome visitors who needed to be removed efficiently. As the Eternal Dawn left Luna Station, Thex stood at a viewport watching Earth shrink behind them. He understood now what had really happened. Humanity had not simply withdrawn from the Council. They had outgrown it. The Council was no longer relevant to human interests. Earth did not need galactic trade or Council protection or access to ancient knowledge. They had their own trade, their own protection, their own knowledge. The Council had nothing to offer that humanity wanted. That realization was more devastating than any military defeat. The Council had not just lost a member species. They had become obsolete to the most dynamic civilization in the galaxy, and there was nothing they could do about it. They could not force humanity to return. They could not offer anything humanity needed. They could only watch as their failure became obvious to everyone. The journey back to Council space took longer because more gateway nodes had failed while they were gone. Thex spent the time writing his report. It was 5 years after humanity walked away. Claire Bennett emerged from retirement to give a speech. She had not spoken publicly since leaving the council chamber. Her silence had been deliberate. She had needed time to distance herself from the anger and disappointment. Now, standing at the podium at Harvard University, she felt ready to share what she had learned. Her speech was broadcast across human space and, through Zaltharian networks, throughout much of the galaxy. She spoke about the lessons humanity had learned from their time in the Council, about how they had tried to be good galactic citizens, about how they had followed the rules even when those rules were unjust, about how every act of generosity had been exploited and every gesture of goodwill punished. We learned that peace and prosperity cannot be built on a foundation of injustice, she said. Her voice was steady and clear. That cooperation means nothing without respect. That community requires more than proximity. It requires shared values, mutual support, and accountability when those principles are violated. The audience listened in complete silence. So we walked away, she continued. Not in anger, though we had cause for anger. Not in fear, though they tried to make us afraid. We walked away because we recognized a truth the Council refused to acknowledge. Some institutions are beyond reform. Some relationships are not worth maintaining. Sometimes the healthiest choice is simply to leave. The speech lasted 40 minutes. When it ended, the applause was thunderous. But Claire barely heard it. She was thinking about the 372 people who had died in the asteroid belt, about whether leaving had been justice for them or just escape, about whether humanity had made the right choice or simply the only choice they could live with. 7 years after leaving the Council, Earth announced the formation of the Cooperative Alliance. It was not a replacement for the Council, but an alternative model. Membership was open to any species that shared core principles: mutual respect, fair trade, collective security, equal voice regardless of age or power. The charter was simple and clear. No species was more important than any other. The Zaltharians joined immediately. They had been working with humanity for 5 years and had found the relationship beneficial. The vaccines Earth provided had ended their Kandarian fever crisis. The trade agreements had been fair. The cultural exchanges had been enriching. They trusted humanity in ways they had never trusted the Council. Within months, 23 species had signed the founding charter. Some were junior species that had been oppressed by the Council. Others were independent worlds that had never joined the Council at all. A few were former Council members who had formally withdrawn. All of them saw the Alliance as something new, a chance to build something better. The Alliance operated on principles the Council had never embraced. Technology was shared freely among members. Trade was regulated to prevent exploitation. Military resources were pooled for collective defense. Most importantly, there were real enforcement mechanisms. Species that violated Alliance principles faced consequences. No member was too powerful to be held accountable. The Galactic Council attempted to portray the Alliance as a threat. Their propaganda called it an aggressive upstart trying to destabilize galactic order, but the characterization rang hollow. The Alliance did not make territorial demands. They did not threaten anyone. They simply offered an alternative. Species could choose to join or not. The choice was theirs. More and more species chose the Alliance. The benefits were obvious. Alliance members had access to human technology. They received humanitarian aid when needed. They participated in collective defense. They had equal voices in decision-making. The contrast with Council membership, where junior species paid dues but received little in return, was stark. Kira was among the first Zaltharians to join the Alliance diplomatic corps. She had spent years feeling guilty about her silence when humanity needed support. Now she had a chance to build something better. She worked alongside human diplomats, helping other species navigate the transition from Council to Alliance membership. The work was challenging but deeply satisfying. Secretary Helen Grant served as Alliance Director, a position that carried responsibility but no special privilege. She maintained the same quiet competence she had shown during those first desperate negotiations with the Council delegation. Under her leadership, the Alliance grew steadily. She refused all attempts to make Earth the dominant power. The alliance would succeed or fail as a genuine partnership. 10 years after humanity walked out, Chancellor Thrain called what would be the final session of the Galactic Council. Only 8 species attended. The chamber, once magnificent, showed signs of neglect. The smart matter walls flickered. The environmental system struggled. Without human maintenance, even the Council's home was falling apart. Thrain stood before the nearly empty chamber. He was ancient now, even by his species' long-lived standards. He did not rail against humanity. He did not denounce the alliance. He simply acknowledged reality. The Council had failed. Its time had passed. He proposed formal dissolution, with remaining assets distributed among member species. The motion passed unanimously. There was nothing left to fight for. As the last representatives filed out, Thrain remained alone in the empty chamber. He thought about the warning signs he had ignored, the opportunities for reform he had rejected, the moment humanity had stood up and he had laughed. Pride, he realized too late, was a luxury no species could afford when justice was at stake. He had let pride destroy the institution he had spent 6 centuries leading. The Vrexian Consortium survived as a shadow of its former self. Ambassador Thex had managed to negotiate alliance membership after extensive reforms. The consortium had publicly apologized for the attack on human ships. They had compensated the families of the dead. They had demonstrated genuine change. Earth had eventually accepted their application, though the relationship remained cautious. Other former Council species faced various fates. Some joined the alliance after proving their commitment to its principles. Some maintained independence, trading with alliance members on fair terms. A few clung to the old ways and found themselves increasingly isolated. The galaxy was reorganizing around new principles, and species that refused to adapt were being left behind. 15 years after the humans walked away in silence, the galaxy had fundamentally changed. The Cooperative Alliance included 67 species. Trade flourished under fair regulations. Technology advanced through shared research. Conflicts were resolved through mediation backed by collective force. The system was not perfect, but it functioned on principles of fairness the Council had never embraced. Earth remained the Alliance's de facto leader, not through power or dominance, but through consistent adherence to principles. They had refused special privileges. They had shared their technology freely. They had provided aid without exploitation. They had kept every promise they made. Other species trusted them because humanity had earned that trust through actions, not words. Claire Bennett lived quietly on Earth, surrounded by grandchildren. She gave occasional lectures about knowing when to walk away from toxic situations. Young diplomats studied her famous departure as an example of principled action. She had become a legend, though she found that deeply ironic. She had not done anything heroic. She had simply gotten tired of being treated badly and left, but perhaps that was heroic in its own way. Perhaps recognizing when a situation was untenable and having the courage to walk away took its own kind of strength. Perhaps the lesson was not about grand gestures or dramatic confrontations. Perhaps it was about knowing your own worth and refusing to accept less than you deserved. The galaxy remembered the Great Silence. That period when humanity had simply stopped caring about beings who had treated them with contempt. It served as a cautionary tale about the cost of injustice and the consequences of taking others for granted. But it also served as something else, a reminder that walking away in silence could be the loudest statement of all, because humanity had not sought revenge. They had not waged war. They had not even gloated at their former oppressors' failures. They had simply built something better and invited others to join them. And in doing so, they had proven that the greatest human strength was never their technology or their determination. It was their unwavering belief that a better galaxy was possible. More importantly, they had demonstrated the willingness to create that better galaxy themselves when existing institutions failed. They had not waited for permission or approval. They had not tried to reform something that was beyond reform. They had simply started over with better principles and shown others that a different path was possible. The Council learned, far too late, that some species were dangerous not because they fought, but because they refused to accept injustice as inevitable. Humanity had looked at centuries of exploitation and said no, not with anger or violence, but with a simple decision to no longer participate. That quiet refusal had changed the galaxy more than any war could have. Young species throughout the galaxy learned from humanity's example. When faced with unfair systems, they no longer just accepted them as permanent. They asked whether those systems deserved their participation. They consider